So welcome to our latest Exeter Tehran conversation in philosophy. And today we're going to be talking about something which I think hopefully will be quite popular, maybe quite fiery, quite controversial. It'd be nice to kind of get some argument going. And this is going to be the session on feminist philosophy. And I should say that feminist philosophy is not just a token way of getting a woman in to speak. We have really tried, to be honest, to get more and more women as our guests, and unfortunately we've failed, and this is my fault, I will admit it. But we definitely are clear that women in Iran are very much part of this conversation of what philosophy is, and this is something that people need to know more broadly, and they're very much active in the process of doing philosophy. And also, what we probably will be doing is we'll talk about feminism in the philosophical context, but also how it relates to the wider question of gender studies, probably of feminism or feminist theory in the wider humanities as well, because I'm sure that will be of interest to many people. So without further ado, let me pass to my colleague, Mohsen Feyzbakhsh.
Thank you, Sajjad. Today we will talking about feminist philosophy with Sayyidah Zahra Moballegh as our guest, and thank you, Zahra, for accepting the invitation. Sayyidah Zahra Moballegh is an assistant professor of philosophy and women's studies at the Institute for Humanities and Cultural Studies in Tehran. She has also been a visiting assistant professor at Harvard Divinity School from 2018 to 2019. She has got all of her degrees in philosophy from University of Tehran. She is the author of The Logical Structure of Illuminative Philosophies in 2020 and Faith as Reason, a Theological Approach to Feminist Epistemologies, which is published in 2013, both in Persian. She has also published on various topics, including feminist philosophy and theology and Islamic philosophy and theology. And her recent project is on reconstructing the moral foundations of the act of narrating in the Quranic narratives. So thank you, Zahra, for accepting the invitation. We are very delighted to have you here. Maybe I should start, Sajjad, or you will?
No, please go ahead.
Go. Okay. I think unlike other sessions where we were discussing a philosophical subdiscipline which was very well established and indeed institutionalized, this session we are talking about a topic which is not an established discipline in Iranian academy, and we have departments of, for example, philosophy of religion, Islamic philosophy, analytic philosophy, and so on and so forth. But I think there is no feminist philosophy department in Iran. So after asking how and why you have been engaged in philosophy, why have you been engaged in feminist philosophy, maybe we should ask a more fundamental question of what is feminist philosophy and why is it less addressed in the Iranian philosophical context. So we are at your service, Zahra, and the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone, and good evening. Thank you so much, Sajjad and Mohsen, for having me, and my special thanks for including this very important topic in your conversation series, because as you know, and as you said, Mohsen, feminist philosophy is deeply disregarded in Iran, and it is not only ignored in the mainstream philosophical trends, but also, and more importantly and very upsetting, it's been condemned, and sometimes it has been anathematized in the philosophical trends in Iran and in the academia. So I'm very appreciated for including this topic in your conversation series, and I wish that this discussion and conversation sheds light on the situation, on the bad situation of feminist philosophy in the Iranian academia, and maybe it changes some minds about the nature of feminist philosophy and its importance So I think I can start with my own experience of studying feminist philosophy. As you said, I have worked in both disciplines, both in Islamic philosophy and feminist philosophy, which may seem in the first glance a strange thing that someone works both in Islamic and feminist philosophy. They seem very very incompatible, because they're saying that there is no connection between the two fields, because Islamic philosophy is a traditional rubric, and it is very metaphysical. Metaphysics is the main part of Islamic philosophy, and Muslim philosophers didn't have any attention to gender and sex issues, gender justice, social justice, and concepts such as justice, social justice, race, and something like these. Even the concepts of equality were not at issue for them. They didn't discuss about these concepts. Maybe those concepts didn't make any sense for them at that time. And on the other hand, feminist philosophy is a postmodern or modern or postmodern a branch of philosophy or approach to philosophy, which is famous for its anti-metaphysical approaches and ideas, and for its thinking about knowledge in terms of relativism. So they seem to be very incompatible with each other, and there is no connection between the two. But if you can look from my point of view, and if someone stands where I am standing, that will seem very normal, more than normal, to that someone like me would desire to seek both feminist and Islamic philosophy. Why? Why I should explain it? Because 20 years ago, when I entered university, I was identifying myself as a woman who was born and bred in an Iranian culture and is studying philosophy. So these two important elements were what through which I was identifying myself, being a woman and being an Iranian person who is studying philosophy. And both of these two elements were problematic for me at that time. I will talk about the second element first. That studying philosophy in Iran is problematic in one sense, because I don't think that philosophy and studying or researching in philosophy is only an occupation. I wanted at that time, and still I want, to discover something in philosophy for my today's life, for our today's world. And I wanted to do something with philosophy, not just reading the philosophical text, for example, reading and understanding the Parmenides poem or Hegel's phenomenology of spirit. They are very valuable and fruitful in themselves, but they are the pure reading of this text is not applicable, is not suitable, is not fruitful for our today's life. We should find something new in this text for changing our view about the world, for getting the world better, for making the world a better place to live. And what I was seeing, what I was experiencing in the academy was not that. I remember that in your conversation with Dr. Odabai about continental philosophy in Iran, he mentioned that in the 70 and 80 decades, I mean by Shamsi calendar, in Iran, it was a special era in the contemporary history of Iran, because it was 10 years had passed after a very long war, and at that time society in general and academy in particular could stop, could breathe, and could think and rethink about where they are standing, about their situation, their conditions, and their relations to the world. So the society and the academy and the cultural centers were flourishing in many new books, new magazines, new newspapers, cultural centers and cultural organizations emerged and flourished very rapidly. And the idea or the doctrine of the dialogue among civilizations was very serious at that time. And I remember that many thinkers started to write about the possibility or impossibility of reviving or reconstructing an Iranian Islamic culture or civilization for today. And what I was experiencing at the academy, at the university, was completely in contrast with these desires of the society. In the academy, we read the philosophical texts of Muslim philosophers only for understanding them. They were regarded as such a sacred text that should be interpreted only in one way. And due to this picture of sacredness, all students would think that Islamic philosophy is a dead discipline. We are encountering with a dead body of texts and resources that are not at all applicable to our lives. While on the contrary, we could see that in the Western tradition, this is not the way, this is not the story. In Western tradition, philosophers are reading and rereading the philosophical text, their tradition, to make the text speak for today's life. For example, they read Aristotle, they read Plato again and again to find new concepts, to give new interpretations of the text in a way that are applicable for our today's life, that can change our perspective or our approach toward the world, and which is suitable or fruitful for our relations toward the others. So it was a very big question for me, like many other students in philosophy, that how should we study Islamic philosophy and how should we encounter with the Islamic tradition in a way that it is applicable, it is meaningful for me as a young student who is living in the 20th century, for example. So I did my best to reread the Islamic tradition, philosophical tradition, and I chose the most difficult task for myself at that time. I decided to study and reread Ishraqi philosophy, which is very far from our understanding, our ordinary understanding of the world. You know that Ishraq metaphysics sees everything as light and sees everything as representations of the emergence of bigger light, and it's very far from our ordinary view toward the world. But I tried to get close and to understand what Sohrawardi and some other Ishraqi Muslim philosophers wanted to say to us, and I tried to reconstruct the real logic that is hidden behind the metaphysics. By this logic, I didn't mean that the logic that is introduced in the logical treatises and books of the philosophers. I believe that this is not the real logic of each metaphysical system, but the real logic of any metaphysical system should be discovered and reconstructed through analyzing the metaphysical elements of that philosophical tradition. For example, whatever a metaphysical system says about the structure of reality, the categories of reality, our possibilities to know the reality, all of these metaphysical elements can change the logic in another way. And what I could understand and discover in the real logic of the Ishraq Hikmat al-Ishraq, was that this logic is deeply practical. And it was very interesting for me that the most theoretical part of philosophy in Hikmat al-Ishraq is joined with the practical aspects of this philosophy. It means that for getting a better or more reliable knowledge of the world, you should practice to be a better human being, to be more moral being. This is what I tried to understand and to reread from the Islamic philosophical tradition. So it was a try to get close to a view toward the world that is very far from my understanding. But about the first element of my identity, that I was a woman who was reading philosophy, it was more problematic for me because, as you can imagine, philosophy departments in Iran, unfortunately, I should say that, have a misogynist atmosphere, and every woman student of philosophy, it's very common for her to hear such sentences from professors like that. Why are you here? What are you doing here? What is the relation between women and philosophy? Women and philosophy? Why aren't you at home washing dishes? And these questions were really shocking for me at the beginning of my education career. So, and I couldn't accept that questions and claims about the contrast between women and philosophy, just like many other of my classmates couldn't accept that, because, for example, I was the top students, I had the best grades in philosophy, and many others, women students also, they were top students, and we could understand everything very better than some of our male classmates, and it was not acceptable for us. So this social and some kind of political context of the atmosphere in the University of Tehran and in all departments of philosophy led me to see what women has done in philosophy. So I started reading the works by women philosophers, and it is not of surprise that most of women philosophers are entitled as feminist philosophers. And it was a hard task for me at that time because no one had any information about feminist philosophy at the university, everywhere. And I was alone. In family, my parents were encouraging me, but at the university, I was really alone. So I started gathering materials from everywhere. And at that time, the library of I think the Center for the Study, the Center for the Dialogue Among Civilizations, I think, the library was updated, and some of the most important sources could be found there. And some of my friends gave me two important books of Sandra Harding, who is the most important figure in feminist philosophy. And some of my other friends in other countries sent me copies of the most important and recent articles and books in feminist philosophy. And I could read huge material in feminist philosophy. And I was so lucky that those philosophers, those authors were alive and still are there. And I could directly ask my questions from those philosophers. For example, I should thank Pamela Sue Anderson, who passed away some years ago, unfortunately. Susan Hogg, who is not a feminist philosopher, but she helped me a lot. Linda Zagzebski, Neil Hankinson Nelson, they all answered my questions with patience, and they welcomed my work, and they encouraged me through this path. And it was very interesting for me that these feminist philosophers or women philosophers were addressing exactly was my own problem in studying philosophy in Iran. They were criticizing the male-centered or the masculine concept of reason throughout the history of philosophy. They criticized this concept, and they explained that the concept of reason has been masculinized throughout the history of philosophy, because philosophers were obliged, they explain it by rereading the text of Plato and Aristotle, and then the next philosophers. The philosophers were obliged to define reason in terms of something that is concrete, because reason is very, very theoretical, is a very far concept. They had to define it in terms of concrete concepts, such as male and female, such as night and day, such as evil and good. And according to this definition, a dichotomy in understanding reason emerged in the history of philosophy and continued to be the main way of understanding reason. So throughout the history of philosophy, reason was identified with the male element, with good, with independence, with authority, with having agency. And on the contrary, emotions were put in the opposite side of reason, and were identified with women or female elements, and with evil, with dependency, and everything that is negative. This dichotomy or this dualistic view toward reason made women be excluded from the realm of philosophy, because women were identified with emotions, and women didn't have any access to reason. So women were not only complete human beings, and also they were not able to study philosophy or to think philosophically or theoretically. It was very interesting. The most interesting thing in feminist philosophies at that time for me was that. But to answer the second question of Mohsen, it was, what is feminist philosophy? Yeah.
Yeah.
May I have a break?
And why is it? Yeah, I think we talked about some of.
Maybe I can just quickly comment on something. I mean, you know, obviously we've already spoken about how philosophy has this very significant social element in Iran, and this has come up again and again. But you've also raised two other things. One is this, I guess, this idea that philosophy really should be about critique, and perhaps this is one of the things which is missing from a lot of the kind of academic philosophy, certainly in the University of Tehran. And the other one, I guess, is this question of universality of things like reason. So I'll just give you a quick anecdote. The first big philosophy conference I went to, and I'm not a philosopher, I will say that out, in '98 was the World Congress of Philosophy. And there was a big plenary in that where there was a bit of a fight because you had John Silver, a very traditional Kantian, you had Said Hussein Nasr, you had Martha Nussbaum, and you had Lucius Outlaw. And Silber and Nasr were defending this idea that feminism is kind of a passing fad, and it has no relevance to the way in which we think about reason and the way we do philosophy. And as you can imagine, Martha Nussbaum basically wiped the floor with them because she She really went for it, and I kind of almost felt sorry for Sayyid Hussain, but he kind of asked for it by making a very provocative comment. So I guess that was common. You know, this is the late 90s. This is roughly the time, I guess, you're talking about, late 90s, early 2000s. I guess the question I would have, which connects to this, what is feminist philosophy, and you can develop that, would be, can you see things whether things have changed in the last 20 years? I mean, are we getting more recognition about this question about whether reason really is a universal, you know, colorblind, culturally neutral, gender neutral concept? Or is it becoming more established that, you know, reason is very much constructed in particular contexts, and we need to pay attention to that? And then how has the process been of the kind of increasing acceptance of feminist approaches to philosophy? Sorry, that's a lot there, but just trying to connect.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sajjad, for this crucial question. And the answer is very hard to say what feminist philosophy is. Is feminist philosophy really philosophy? And in answering the role of feminist philosophy in changing our mind about the concepts of reason and rationality, these questions are very crucial questions. And if someone wants to answer such questions, they should write a book, really, because all the history of feminist philosophy during the recent century, what was to explain exactly these questions. So I want to start with the concept of feminist philosophy. As you know, feminist philosophy has social and political roots and background, and the feminist philosophy is really the child or the result of the political movements and social movements in the Europe and in the United States, by women who claimed justice for women. They were resisting against oppression against women, and they wanted equal rights, just as men had in the Europe and in the United States. And because of this political background, some thinkers, like the example you said, Sajjad, believe that feminist philosophy is not really philosophy, but feminist philosophical works are in fact a collection of political doctrines which are not very authentic, which are not reliable or original. But I believe that feminist philosophy is philosophy, but I don't think that it is feminist at all. I will explain it a little bit more. What distinguishes let me start from the beginning. What established feminist philosophy or made feminist philosophy being emerged in about 50 years ago was the question of those political movements about human rights. Those movements needed a theoretical background, a theoretical explanation about the equality of women and men. And this question needed an explanation about the nature of humanity. What is a human? Is a human who thinks? Is a human who doesn't have any emotion? Is the complete or absolute human a person who can think abstractly and detached from its body and emotions? Or should we define humanity in terms of other things? Is humanity something more complicated than this? So this very political question resulted in philosophical thinking about the nature of humanity, and also the nature of laws, the nature of right, the nature of values and virtues, and the nature of justice. And due to this basic question about the nature of humanity and other things, feminist philosophy is really philosophy, because it deals with the most fundamental questions of philosophy. And I think that one of the most fundamental questions is about who is human and how should we define humanity. And by reviewing the history of philosophy, not only the history of philosophy, but the whole Western tradition, feminist philosophers could demonstrate that during this long history, humanity was defined in terms of reason, and reason has been defined in terms of abstractness, independency, agency, subjectivity, and having control over something that is to be known, that is going to be known. This kind of defining humanity and reason, feminist philosophers believe that is restricting, and it is resulting in the opposite conclusion, an opposite conclusion that was not wanted by or desired by those philosophers who defined reason in this way. Because in this way, humanity is confined to a reason that is not an actual and a realistic reason. Because feminist philosophers, such as many other postmodern philosophers, argue that we cannot think independent and detached from our material conditions, detached from our body, detached from our context, our social and political context, our background, and even we can't think absolutely and abstractly and detached from our religious beliefs, our many other things. We are thinking within a network of many determining elements that lead our thinking, and we cannot think detached from detached from this network. And so defined so, the reason cannot be an abstract reason, an absolute reason. Reason is something that is intertwined closely and deeply with emotions, with body, and with history, with politics and social context of the thinking agent. So we don't have, we cannot follow the epistemology in the way that the traditional philosophy prescribes. And also in ethics, we cannot consider the moral agent as an agent who is alone in a room without any other human being or any other being in front of her, and she should think about some moral questions. For example, if she is to rescue someone who is going to be die, for example, if she tells a lie. Feminist philosophers explain that this is not real ethics, and this is not applicable to our real lives. In the real lives, we are living with the others, we are living in the networks of connections and interactions with the others, and ethics is the moment when we are encountering with the other, with an other person who is as human as me, who is as respected as me, and who is as agent as me. This is the moment when ethics is gave birth to ethics. And so the ethics cannot be defined through in terms of virtue ethics or responsibility or the conclusion of what we are doing. So they develop different epistemologies, different ethical systems, and I think that they have brought many new insights and many new perspectives to the philosophy. But so I absolutely and deeply believe that feminist philosophies are really philosophies, and they are really represent the critical kind of thinking, because they ask us to criticize everything, especially the fundamentals, and they invite us to rethink the fundamental. They show us that everything that is established in in our beliefs, and we believe that something that thing is right or is obvious, they remind us that that thing, even that thing, is determined by the structures of power and politics, and those structures are hidden and are forming and shaping and our understanding of the world. But those structures are exactly the basis of understanding the way in a certain way, from a certain point of view, and they remind us that there are many other points of view that are not seen in this structure. So they constantly ask us, from whose point of view is this, for example, doctrine formulated, for whose interest, and for whose needs, and is this doctrine or this science or this kind of knowledge has been developed. These questions of for whose interest and from whose point of views are the most critical and fundamental questions that feminist philosophers insist on asking them in every encounter with any knowledge, any kind of knowledge. And they talk very much about these structures of power that make some points of view and make some people or some groups of people invisible, and claim for being the absolute, the general, and the universal knowledge. But in fact, they are defective, they are insufficient, because they have omitted a very important point of view in what they are representing. I don't know if it's needed that I explain it more or no, but if it is needed, I will explain it more. So due to these reasons, I believe that feminist philosophies are really philosophical and are one of the most critical approaches toward philosophy in the recent decades. But if you ask me if this feminist philosophy is feminist, with hesitation, I should say no, because I don't think that what feminist philosophers say are really feminist or at all, or gendered. I think that at the beginnings, feminist philosophers wanted to reach women to the degree of being dependent and agent, but gradually they understood that the wrong thing in the Western philosophical tradition is not that women are not equal to men. The wrong is that everything was defined through that dichotomy that I told about, emotion and reason, and we are understanding the world and interpreting the world and each other through the dualistic lenses. So they insisted on the necessity of leaving that dualistic lenses and trying to see everything in the networks of connections, interconnections, interactions, and to discover the structures of power that make some important things invisible in the representations of the world. But nothing is feminine in these philosophies, as, for example, Susan Hike, in one of her important articles, I think the name was Reflections of an Old Feminist, I think. She explains that one cannot find nothing or put finger on something special in these philosophies as a feminine element. They are philosophizing in their works, and this philosophizing is not gendered at all. I think what they claim for challenging everything, for challenging every fundamental, is a humanistic claim, not a feminist claim. So I think only the background is feminism, has some gendered elements, but they have gone beyond this gendered dichotomy, and they are they are explaining the world in terms of very complicated concepts and explanations. So,
I mean, of course, you know, this is kind of the classic issue, isn't it? Which is, what do we mean by this term feminist, right? So, and I can imagine there is a lot of baggage, in lots of contexts, there's a lot of baggage that the term feminist comes with. I can imagine in Iran, I mean, I know that the term's been, you know, debated for decades, you know, and not just since the 90s, you know, but well before that as well. So perhaps one of the issue is the sort of problems perhaps of labeling this sort of critique as feminist. But yeah, I mean, I want to know a bit more about the reception. I mean, you said right at the beginning, it's just, you know, the reception is hostile, but if you can say a bit more about the reception, and then maybe how that relates to how we deal with this label feminist.
as you know, in many countries on the planet, women philosophers and also women thinkers disguise or prevent to have hesitation to be entitled as feminist. I think this hesitation or disguise comes from the political background of feminist movements. I think so. And as you see, many Muslim feminists say that, please do not call me a feminist. They insist on that. And part of this is because the political background of that, the term, but part of it is what is due to what has happened in the history of feminism in all, because feminism was a movement that started from Europe and United States and was led by some women from a special class of society. They were white women. They were from the rich class of the society. They were, most of them were educated. They could write and read. So what they wanted was very different from the needs and views and desires of the rest of women in the society. For example, Black women in America tried to develop their own views about the world, about economics, about politics, and they didn't want to be called as feminist philosophers or feminist thinkers because they believe that feminism is a term that is restricted for a special class of white women of America and United and Europe, and this feminist movement doesn't cover their needs, their views, and their interests. So, for example, they called themselves as womanist philosophers. And for example, Muslim feminists like to be called as, some of them like to be called as womanist intellectuals, and some of them don't like any gendered label. And I think that when it goes gradually, many philosophers understood that feminism doesn't describe the real perspective or approach, because feminism has a both political and a gendered background and sense in itself. But feminist philosophers are the so-called feminist philosophers are not restricting their views and their theories to these gendered issues and to the dichotomy of gender, because as I told, they don't want to think in terms of the dichotomies. They don't want to think even in terms of two possible sexes, and they believe that we can identify people in terms of more than two sexes, and for defining for advocating those people who are not identifying themselves as male or female, they insist to not accepting the title feminist in their activities and in their works. So in Iran, the story, this story is also the case in Iran, but I think that feminism in Iran has a bad sense, a negative sense, because it has been introduced first in Iran through some immoral actions and through some sexual concepts. So when people hear the term feminism, they think that they are encountering with some discussions about sexual relations, and they don't think even that there can be any intellectual issues about feminism. I think in Iran, the both problems are making the term feminism a negative term.
So there isn't much sort of discussion of intersectionality, because you obviously raising womanism, right? Womanism is precisely this kind of issue of intersectionality. That's not just about one particular kind of issue, but that, you know, questions of race and class and sexuality and all these things also impinge upon these distinctions. So is there much, I mean, even intersectionality is a relatively new concept, you know, but I'm wondering if you have those sorts of debates. What would you even call intersectionality in Farsi, in Persian? I have no idea what the term for intersectionality would be in Persian.
I think that recently a book was translated about it, and I don't remember what. Mohsen, do you remember?
No, I don't have any idea. Yeah.
I think that the synonym that the translators, because two translators were engaged, that selected for intersectionality was very rare and was not familiar for the Persian audience. But and when I saw the book, could you find it, Mohsen?
Yeah, the Persian Wikipedia has said dar ham tanidegi, but it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
or beina
clarify the concept. Yes.
Can we say beina jinsiyat?
Yes, I think that there is so far no translator has introduced a good synonym for intersectionality, interdisciplinarity, and these terms are really new to the literature of humanities in the Iranian academia, but they are used in practice. You know that many thinkers, many philosophers, many scholars in social sciences are doing intersectionally, and are developing their ideas and their views intersectionally, but they don't have any name for this kind of thinking about things. So did I address your question?
Yes, thank you. Mohsen, back to you. Sorry, I've been hogging it.
No, it's okay. I would also like to lead the discussion to the context of Iran and more concrete problems, especially within the feminist philosophy, and ask about what is going on in Iran. Can you explain about more about the status of feminist philosophy in terms of courses, publications, etc. in Iran, and if something has been changed within the past few years or stuff like that?
Yes, thank you so much, Mohsen, for this crucial question. I think it's the most important question of this conversation, and we are going to the chase. Um, I prefer to cleave this question into 3 or 4 more questions. First, I want to explain the situation of feminist philosophy in the Iranian academy and something that are going outside the academy. Then I want to explain about the situation of women in the philosophical departments or in philosophy in general. And we can also think about the possibility of developing something like an Islamic feminist philosophy, if I can call something like that. And I'm very happy to see that one of the best students of philosophy at the University of Tehran is here joining us, Mrs. Khalilzadeh. This may change my view. This may change my course of discussion, but I try to be negative enough because the situation is not really positive, as Mansoura may admit me. To explain how is the feminist philosophy in Iran, or where is feminist philosophy standing in Iran, I should briefly say that the feminist philosophy situation in Iran is disappointing, but yet, and at the same time, there are signs to have some hopes, or to be hopeful. In comparison to the whole philosophical scholarship in Iran, feminist philosophy is very, very thin, is a very, very thin body of, has a very thin body of resources. Very few works have been so far published or written in different fields of feminist philosophy, in epistemology, theology, history of philosophy, ethics, aesthetics, and so on. And among these very few works, very fewer ones are reliable, authentic, and original. So I can count all of the reliable and authentic works in feminist philosophy in Iran and in Farsi with my 2 hands, and it is very disappointing and upsetting. There is no research or data center to see how many works has been published or written in the field of feminist philosophy so far, but I just took a look to the main sources, the National Library, the Iran Doc, and some other sources. And as to the best of my knowledge, the amount of the works that are purely philosophical, including books, book chapters, articles in magazines and in journals, and dissertations, does not reach to the number of 200, and it's very upsetting. And if you add the works that are done in social sciences, in Islamic studies, in law schools, and in fine art schools, if you add the number of the works in feminism in these fields to this number, that would change. Your view will change. But the purely philosophical works are really few in comparison to the whole body of philosophical scholarship in Iran.
Just add one question to that. Does that
Yeah.
include translations into Persian?
Include?
Translations into Persian.
Yes, most of these works are in fact translations, and unfortunately there are very few good translations from other languages into Farsi. And one problem in pursuing and studying feminist philosophy in Iran is that there is no good terminology and literature and enough vocabulary to write from a feminist point of view, because when you want to write, for example, about what Irigari says about body, female body, there is no translation in Farsi, and the words or terms in French are themselves very problematic. And in Farsi, we don't know how to explain and how to reformulate them. So we are very poor in the literature and vocabulary and terminology of feminist philosophy. But what I wanted to say is that I think that the main problem that the main deficiency that causes this very poor and thin body of knowledge in feminist philosophy is that there are very few philosophers, if any at all, who know anything about feminist philosophy in the departments of philosophy. And so it's very natural that feminist philosophy is not taught or talked about in the departments of philosophy, and very rarely any professor can mention something about feminist philosophies in their classes. And this reinforces the situation, because students do not get familiar with feminist philosophy, the importance of it, and they do not encourage to pursue feminist philosophy at all. Very few works that are done in feminist philosophy in Iran are encouraged by some few professors who are expertise in postmodern thinking. Especially the one who is in Shahid Beheshti, who has encouraged some students to work on feminist epistemology and feminist ethics. And there are some inclinations in the departments of philosophy of science in Amir Kabir and Sharif University to work on feminist epistemologies and feminist philosophy of science. But the case is not so good in the departments of feminist studies or women's studies. We have some departments of women's studies in Iran, at Tehran University, in Qom, and in some other universities. And unfortunately, the majority of professors and students in that discipline do not have a philosophical background, and I think that they have only one course under the title of feminist philosophy, which doesn't have a good professor usually, and students are not trained or getting familiar with feminist philosophy, in fact. And what has been produced by those professors at universities are really negative. They have a very harsh view toward feminist philosophy. They only criticize feminist philosophy in that feminist philosophy is anti-religious, anti-God, or because of its its belief in relativism. So the very few works that has been published so far in feminist philosophy are to be said that has been the result of the endeavor of a student or a scholar who had self-motivation to pursuing feminist philosophy, and there is no place to encourage, to train, to develop feminist philosophy, and to even to introduce feminist philosophy to the students. I wanted to add something else about Mohsen's question. Fortunately, the publications on feminist philosophy has been increased dramatically during the last 2 decades. In the 80s, I have seen that about 20 works have been published about feminist philosophy, but in the 90s, this number augmented into about 70 works, which is really promising. And the works that are producing recently are more reliable, are more innovative, and they are trying to create a new vocabulary and a new terminology for pursuing feminist philosophy.
And what about specifically theological or works in philosophy of religion?
Yeah, I wanted to give you
you had written on this.
Yeah. Yes.
You had written on this.
Yes.
I think you
I have worked on feminist theology and feminist epistemology, and it is interesting that most works in feminist philosophy are dedicated first and with a high degree to feminist epistemology, then to feminist theology and philosophies of religion. And it's very interesting that students and scholars are interested in these two the fields of feminist philosophy, and then to ethics, then to revising the history of philosophy, and some works are dedicated to aesthetics and philosophy of art, for example. But the good news is that during the last years, I have observed among my students very, very good female students who are really talented in philosophy and who are really interested in feminist philosophy. Not only female students, but also male students are really interested in feminist philosophy. And I know that so many reading book circles and discussion circles have been led by students to study feminist works in philosophy, and it's very promising, and it's giving us hope that our conception and idea about feminist philosophy is going to change. And if more students, more scholars engage with feminist philosophy, the male picture, the male-centered picture of philosophy and philosopher will change very soon. Unfortunately, nowadays and so far, our perception of a philosopher, a professor of philosophy, and the writer of a philosophical book is really masculine. Our students have seen no woman professor, no woman philosopher, and very rarely they can see the name of a woman on the as the writer of a book, of a philosophical book. And this is enforcing itself. This is a deficient circle that enforces itself and empowers the male picture of philosophy and being philosopher for the students and audiences of philosophy. I think if more students are encouraged to engage with feminist philosophies, then our conception of philosophy will change in terms of gender. This is the second question that I wanted to answer, that what is the place of women in philosophy in Iran? That is more upsetting than the place of feminist philosophy in Iran, because according to the data that I gathered from everywhere, about nearly 60% of the students of philosophy in the bachelor degree are women students, and this percent decreased to about 40% in the master degree, and this percent decreases into about 30 or 35% in the doctoral degree. But the worst thing is that if you count the number of women professors in departments of philosophy, less than 10% of professors are women professors. And we should ask the question, where are those very students of philosophy, women students of philosophy? Why aren't there tenure tracks? at any department? Why aren't they teaching? Aren't they philosophy professors at all? Why we know that many top students in philosophy are women students, and some of them are very, very motivated to continue philosophy, and some of them have submitted very remarkable and considerable dissertations, but when they wanted to enter university as professor, they are not accepted at all, only because they are women. And it's very upsetting, and it is more upsetting not because women are not accepted as professors, but it is more upsetting because this not letting women professors to enter philosophy departments reinforces that male picture of a philosopher. A woman student of philosophy doesn't have any imagination of her being a professor in the future. She can't imagine that she will be a professor, a real professor in the future. So she doesn't do her best to reach this position. But I think that the new generation will change the picture, because they are they have enough self-estimation, self-confidence to seek what they want. And I think that the new generation, both women and men students of philosophy, do not see philosophy in terms of gender and sexual differences. And I think that they can change the gender discrimination in philosophy, in the departments of philosophy, in the near future, inshallah.
Shall we open up to questions? There was one thing you mentioned, but we'll come back to this, on this possibility of an Islamic feminist philosophy, but we'll come back to this. Let's open it up to questions. I know Mansoura had a question, so maybe we'll start with her.
Yes, thank you. I'm so happy to see you after about 10 years again. And thank you, Sajjad and Mohsen, for making this possible. I wanted just to say regarding the hope for future, I don't have that much hope because I don't see any support from my male colleagues in Iran, neither in organizing in conferences. They care about inviting women speakers, or even in organization, you see that no woman took place. And also, as we saw in IPM, for example, the new generation, they are there, and there is no woman in the department. So there will be, it will last a long time if there is any hope at all. So I just want to say that. But Mike, I have a lot of questions, but I try only to pose 2 questions. Regarding Islamic feminism, I ask myself if it is a production of European and also American Muslim women, because for example, I don't know such a movement or such circle in Iran at all. I know very little about feminism, feminist philosophy in general. I know about leftist feminists in Iran. They are very good, they are very active, and they are also working on international level, such as Somaye Rostanpour. I appreciate her work very much. And the others who are writing in Iranian journals with all problems in Iran, I mean, but they continue to be active and they produce a lot of text and also translations, as I know. But I haven't heard about Islamic feminists in Iran. It is a very important current in Europe, I know, but I haven't heard about it in Iran, and I asked myself if it is possible to have such thing in Iranian political structure, because you would challenge the standard picture of women, which is which is a standard, you know, it is accepted and nobody should question it. So I would like just to know about these two topics.
Thank you so much, Mansoura. Thank you so much for attending this meeting. I want to fly and to reach you. It's more than 10 years that we haven't met each other. Thank you for your question. Here I tried to restrict my discussion into feminist philosophy, and if we want to discuss about feminism and feminist theories in humanities in Iran, the discussion will change, because in social sciences, feminist theories are very accepted and have had a good reception. But about Islamic feminism, your question about Islamic feminism, it's a critical question, I think, because as you know, many Muslim feminists, I apply this word feminist with hesitation, Muslim womanists or feminists or Muslim women who are working in theoretical disciplines, believe that feminism is, as you said, is a production of the West, and this version of feminism, the familiar version of feminism, cannot be applicable to the Muslim woman and to the Muslim cultures. Each culture, each country, and even each region needs to produce its own version of feminism, but feminism so for example, there's a book, an important book in feminist by a Muslim feminist. The title of the book is that, do Muslim women need help at all? Because Western feminists think that they should change the situation of Muslim women and they should claim equality and freedom for them, while such a change, such a dramatic change for Muslim women in the realistic situation would be very problematic for them and wouldn't be in harmony with their traditions, with their cultures. So many Muslim feminists have claimed that we need to produce our own versions of feminism or womanism. And in Iran, yes, you are right. The literature about Islamic feminism or Muslim feminism works is also very thin, very poor, and it is in some part due to the political implications of introducing such trends in Iran, because as you know, many religious intellectuals in Iran have had to immigrate and leave the country because they had criticized those structures of power that make us restricted. So even feminism can be more dangerous for the established structures of power. So one reason is that Islamic feminism is not introduced to the Iranian academia. But I think another reason is that the students and the scholars in the Islamic studies in Iran do not have enough motivation for studying the most recent trends and issues about Islamic studies in the world, and there are very few scholars who are updated, pursuing the recent trends and recent discussions in the Islamic studies. and many of them cannot study the text in languages other than Farsi, so they are not familiar with such things such as Islamic feminism. But for example, the views of some Arab intellectuals are introduced to the Iranian audiences because they have been written in Arabic, and it was more accessible to the Iranian scholars and in seminaries and in universities. But many works in English, written in English, in German, and French, are not translated into Farsi, so the students and scholars are not familiar at all with these trends in the Western tradition. But I think that things are changing. Some books have been translated recently in the 5 recent years, and I hear some students are, for example, contacting me for working on Islamic feminism or Islam's views about women, such subjects for their dissertation, but I don't see that they are able to introduce Islamic feminism at all. They are not able to do that. So I think that we are very far from a place that we can develop a kind of Iranian feminism, Iranian Islamic feminism. I just tried in the last recent 5 years. I just tried to develop a kind of theology which is unknown in the Islamic tradition, which is the narrative theology, but it is in its first steps, and it's not completely a female approach to the text, but because it considers stories and the act of storytelling in the sacred text of Islam, it has some female elements in itself. This is the only endeavor that I have seen from an Iranian scholar have done in Islamic feminism. But you know that there are some Muslim feminists outside Iran, like Ziba Mir Hosseini, who is an important figure in Islamic feminism. And yes, outside Iran, we can think about it.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. Shall we go first to Mariam Kharadmand?
Mariam Kharadmand, should I?
She's.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Hello.
Yes, please go ahead.
Sure.
First of all, I want to thank you for this conversation, which is very useful for me. You were talking about the problems of masculine society and masculine philosophical society in Iran, but I want to somehow change the viewpoint, okay? And then turn to the feminist Muslims in Iran, or let's say all the institutes which are dealing with women's studies in Iran, that are they really deal with the women issues in Iran? You know, as you said, that in Arab countries, usually the Muslim feminists deal with challenging issues in societies. But in Iran, I really don't see any challenging issue they're working on or deal with. Sometimes, yes, we hear some political issues, or they just open up some discussion about different topics like hijab or something. But do they really work on empowerment of women in society? For example, one of the challenging issues of Muslim countries is women's ijtihad, which nowadays there are lots of actually even philosophical points on this, that whether women are able to be mujtahid or not. but do we really have at least some academic articles on these issues? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mariam, for your question. I couldn't see you in the picture, but thank you for this question. And
I'm sorry, my connection is so poor, so I just go with my voice.
Okay, I think that it was my something was wrong with me. You asked a good question and you answered the question. In fact, actually, as you said, the women's movements and women's claims for equal rights in Iran is not going very well. As you explained, there are many restrictions and many challenges are in front of women who want to reach equal rights. For example, to become mujtahid, to become a president, even to become a vice president, to have equal rights in family, in heritage, and many different issues which are restricted according to the Islamic law. And again, as you know, very few mujtahids in Iran tried to change the things, to change their fatwas about women's rights and women's issues. Women and gender issues were not they were not important for them. They didn't think about these things, and those very few ones who have thought about gender and women issues had many restrictions. For example, the recently passed away mujtahid Mr. Yusuf Sanei was among the few figures who tried to change the things, the fatwas about women's issues. For example, he claimed that women's diya should be equal to men's. Women's the share of female heritage should be equal to the share of the male member of the family, and he has many new fatwas about women's issues. But as you know, these are not represented and introduced in the official media. And if anyone wants to insist on these fatwas, they will encounter many problems. And if I talk more, I also will encounter with some problems. I think you answered the question. Women activists are doing their best. They are writing, they are shouting, they are resisting against the oppressions, the subjugations, the marginalizings of women, but they were not that successful, that as much as they have tried. And yes, I think that something fundamentally should change in the structures of power. But to be positive, in contrast what Mansoura said, she thinks that things are more negative than being positive. I want to be positive, and I want to invite you to see the things, the changes of the things in a longer perspective, in a bigger perspective. If you compare the situation of women, for example, in the problem of hijab, if you compare the situation of women nowadays with, for example, 20 years ago, you can see that many things have been changed. Not only women's views about hijab has changed, but also men's view toward hijab, and the authority of women to choose their covering, their clothes has changed dramatically. If we still have obligatory hijab, it is not because women and men in Iran are not informed, are not aware of the right of women to choose their clothing, their covering, but it is because the political structures that want to impose something to the citizens. If this view and perspective of the government, of the power, doesn't change toward people, toward the citizens, I think that all the activities by feminist activists in Iran wouldn't be that successful. I hope that they don't get me to the prison. Please don't ask me such questions.
Okay. There is another question which is written in the chat by Fatima. Do you think that feminist philosophy studies concepts or notions that philosophy often doesn't deal with, like sexuality, gender, intersectionality, class? I'm trying to think about the difference between feminism and feminist philosophy. Can we draw this fine line between both disciplines? You said in response to Mansoure that feminism is the production of the West, so feminist philosophy isn't? Thank you. This is the question by Fatima.
Yeah, I think there are 2 or more questions. The last question was about, is feminist philosophy the Western discipline? Yeah.
Yeah.
Did I get the point?
He mentioned you. He mentioned you. You said that that feminism is the production of the West. I think you said that in Iran the representation of feminism is in Iran is that it is produced in the West. But she wants to know, is feminist philosophy isn't feminist philosophy like feminism, in which it is known as the production of the West? And the first question was to maybe the same question is to distinguish between feminism and feminist philosophy, and what is the difference between the two, as far as I know.
I think that we talked about the first question, the difference between feminism and feminist philosophy. As much as I know and I can explain, feminism originally was a political movement by some women who claimed equal rights and equal opportunities and access to education and access to some other social resources. And in the period of claiming these rights, women activists needed to have some theoretical basis for claiming equal rights. So they needed some theoretical background about the nature of humanism, the nature of humanity, the nature of values, virtues, laws, and so on, so that feminist philosophy emerged in the progression of feminism as a social and political movement. So there is no decisive distinction between the 2 disciplines, but feminist philosophy is the continued or an inevitable implication of feminism as a movement. And as to the second question, is feminist philosophy also a Western production? Yes, of course it is. Because it is the continue and the implication of the movement called feminism, which is completely Western and was restricted to the claims of the white women who belong to a special class, social class, and the next objections to this feminism was because of these this Western and European origin of feminism and feminist philosophy. But I think that nowadays feminist philosophy has developed into something more than feminist and more than Western, and many feminist philosophers, among them the Western philosophers, are insisting on the importance of regarding and considering the perspectives or the points of view of women and men in other places on the planet. For example, men and women who are living in a very far city in Balochistan, for example. They believe that those people have access to a point of view and an understanding of the world that is not accessible to us. So they have a valuable experience of the world, and they have a valuable information of the world that we do not have access to it. So we should respect everyone's point of view. More importantly, those people whose points of view are remained invisible and who don't have any voice to declare their points of view and their understanding of the world. I don't know if I could address the question, but it was what I understood from this question. If there isn't any question, I wanted to say something about the possibility of developing an Iranian or Islamic feminist philosophy.
Can we come to that just very briefly? Musa has a question about feminist philosophy of science in Iran. Is there a feminist philosophy of science in Iran? Or maybe Musa, you ask.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I was also writing a comment. I just wanted to say kudos to your brevity. You are a brave person. I really appreciate you being doing like feminist philosophy. Even here, like in the United States, still philosophy is far behind other disciplines in humanity in like having enough female faculty and so on. So I can just imagine how things are in Iran. You mentioned actually about the feminist works that are done in feminist philosophy of science in Iran. I just wondered actually if you can give me some more feedback, because I guess, I mean, feminist philosophy of science is one of those areas in which actually feminist voice has been very successful in terms of being recognized for the very obvious and great contributions that they have done. For instance, I mean, I think in the past, like the previous president of the Philosophy of Science Association was Helen Longino, which is like, she's known as a feminist philosopher of science. I just wanted to, if you can actually talk a little bit more about that, because this is an area in which the works of women feminist philosophers, at least here, has been recognized as being very influential and you know, considered to be like a very high quality, a very top notch. I mean, I'm not saying that in other areas nothing is going on. I'm just trying to keep my knowledge. It's the area that I'm aware of. I don't know about like ethics or political philosophy. So I would love if you can talk a little bit more about what's going on in Iran about feminist philosophy of science. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Musa, for this question, and I appreciate your comprehensive knowledge about feminist philosophy of science. My answer would be very short, because the content of feminist philosophy of science in Iran is very short. The only published work in feminist philosophy of science is an article by Helen Longino that you mentioned in a book, as a book chapter. And I don't think that any other officially published book or book chapter has been published in this topic, but I know that about 5 master and doctoral dissertations in Amir Kabir and Sharif universities have been written on feminist philosophy of science, but those dissertations have not been yet published. And unfortunately, feminist perspectives on philosophy of science are not at all introduced to the philosophical academia in Iran. While they are very important, they have, feminist philosophers had great contribution in the philosophy of science, but their views about objectivity, their views about the challenge of the claim of neutrality, value neutrality of science, all their ideas, the standpoint epistemology, all of them have been unknown and unfamiliar to the Iranian academia, philosophical academia. And I don't see an optimistic horizon about that we can be hopeful that this discipline being familiar, being introduced in the Iranian academia, because very few people are working on this.
Cool.
I should change my place because my battery is going.
Sorry about that. Yeah, apologies. We've taken a lot of your time, but maybe if we can just address that. You know, you said you wanted to say a bit more about the possibilities of an Islamic feminist philosophy. So maybe if you could say a couple of things about that as we kind of wrap up.
Yes. Sorry. Please let me a moment. I think that thinking about the possibility of developing an Islamic philosophical feminist philosophy is the mission and the responsibility of our women philosophers and students and scholars of philosophy in Iran. It is very important because that male-centered picture of philosophy is justified by male professors and male scholars of philosophy by saying that our philosophical heritage and tradition validates such a male-centered view towards philosophy. But I'm not sure that this is the case in the Islamic philosophical tradition. I think that there are some clues to seeking and pursuing some feminine elements in the Islamic philosophical tradition, not only in the works that are famous to be philosophical, but also in the works that are theological, and especially in the works by Sufis and Muslim mystics. I think that this rich body of material, of philosophical material, is potential to give us some clues to develop an Islamic and a feminist Islamic philosophy. This term is very controversial, I know, and since there is nothing there, so the title and the name is more controversial. But I think that we should reread and revise our philosophical heritage to find the answers to some of our questions. We should ask the test if questions like that, if our philosophical tradition systematically is excluding women from the realm of philosophy, or it has been by accident that women were not contributed in the Islamic philosophy. Or we can ask the test questions like that, aren't Muslim philosophers really ignored about gender and women issues? Or why didn't they develop ethical theories as much as they develop their metaphysical theories, why ethics and moral theories are very thin and are disregarded in the Islamic tradition, while metaphysical debates and discussions are very strong and rich in Islamic philosophy. And can we discover or reconstruct some kind of ethical and moral theory from the metaphysical systems of the Islamic philosophies? I think the answer is difficult, but I think the answer is yes. We can reconstruct and rediscover moral systems from the metaphysical systems in the Islamic philosophies. I think that the emphasis of some Sufis and mystics on the importance of emotions, their very detailed discussions on the differences between different emotions, and the insistence of major philosophers on the different parts of the soul and the different virtues of the soul. They all can be and are good materials for developing some kind of feminist or some kind of revolutionary Islamic philosophy. If we are to revive and reread the Islamic tradition, the Islamic philosophical tradition, we should seek the concepts that have been ignored so far in the study, in the investigating the philosophical texts in the Islamic tradition. And those concepts should include and consist concepts such as emotions, embodiment, gender, social justice, and the place of reason and the relation between reason and emotions. These concepts have been ignored and forgotten in our philosophical inquiries, and I think they can be regarded as the seeds for developing and growing up some kind of revolutionary Islamic philosophy.
Great.
Just,
do you want to say something, Sajjad?
no, please go.
Yeah, just a peripheral question. Majid wanted me to ask if you want to contribute to this question about Islamic feminist philosophy. Please add. If you don't, I'll ask that question as the last one.
Sorry, I think I couldn't get the point.
I mean, yeah, I called Sajjad. Sajjad, if you want to add something about feminist philosophy.
I wasn't.
Okay. Now, just Majid wanted me to ask. It's a peripheral question. How do you you mentioned top students of philosophy? How do you measure a top student of philosophy, and what is the contribution of the top students to philosophical debates?
But when I said that someone is a top student in philosophy, I just mean that that student has the best grades and the best results in the exams and in the final exams and entrance exams. This was all that what I meant. For sure, there is no concrete measure for evaluating the ability of someone in philosophy or in humanities. It's very difficult, I think. But I think that the very few ones who have contributed in bringing something new, in innovating something in philosophy in Iran or anywhere in the planet on the earth, that would be a measure for evaluating the degree of being more philosopher for anyone who is writing something in philosophy. If a book, an article has something new, can change our perspective, can broaden our point of view toward the world, that piece of written work would be an authentic and original philosophical work. And this is the only measure that I think I can think about. Yes, it's a hard question.
Thank you. So I think that was a wonderful conversation. There's so many more questions I could ask, but I very much look forward to your Islamic feminist philosophy being published. Just one small anecdote. I gave a job talk about 20 years ago, which was a critique of Mullah Sadr using irigare. And most people in the audience, which is an Islamic studies audience, thought I was crazy. The only person who liked my talk there was actually a feminist philosopher who was from the philosophy department. Of course, you had no say in whether I got the job. Thank you. Thank you to everyone who's been part of this conversation. I'm going to stop recording.